Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining our career advice office hours today. My name is Vera Fishman. I'm a program manager at Coursera. I'm a career coach, and I'm here today to talk about the job application process. What I'm going to do is I'm going to share a presentation in just a second, and I have just a couple of slides to sort of set the context for our conversation. And once I do that, I'm going to be taking questions. So please think of any questions that you have related to the job search, to the job application process, and put them in chat, and I will be addressing as many of them as I can just in a few minutes. But first, let me share my presentation. All right, so I hope everybody can see my presentation now. As I mentioned, we're going to just do maybe 10 minutes where I'm going to talk about the topic of job applications and some things to think about when you're applying for jobs. And after that, we're going to go into Q&A. So again, you are welcome to ask any questions. We have some questions that have been pre-submitted before this webinar. We are going to give priority to the questions that are asked live during the webinar. And to ask a question live, just type it into the chat box in YouTube. Leave a comment there. Now, I encourage you to put those questions in chat as soon as possible. That way we know how to pace this conversation so that I can get to all of the questions there. And before I go any further, let me do a little bit more of introduction of myself. As you already hopefully know, my name is Vera Fishman. I manage career services at Coursera, and I'm a career coach. I live in the Silicon Valley in the San Francisco Bay Area. I have been in the career coaching world for well over 5 years now. I've worked with a lot of professionals here in the Silicon Valley going through different types of career transitions, a lot of people who have lost their jobs and were looking for their next opportunity. Sometimes they were senior people, junior people, people looking to stay in an existing careers, people looking to move into new careers. Before Coursera, I was at Udacity, where I supported their nano degree completers through the Job Search Guarantee program. So I've literally coached thousands of people one-on-one. I've led workshops on resume building, networking, all aspects of interviewing, you name it. So bottom line, I pretty much know everything there is to know about the job search process and about the challenges that people come across during that job search process. The topic of job applications is a huge topic because to me, fundamentally the outcome of that topic is getting interviews. And for a lot of job seekers, getting an interview is one of the biggest challenges they come across, because once you get into the interview process, yes, you need to be prepared to pass an interview, but you're already talking to people, you're getting some feedback. Whereas in the job application, what I see people struggle with a lot is, you apply, you never hear back, you don't know what's going on. And so because of that, that can be a really an experience that is hard to learn from. And so today I want to talk about all of the things that are going to enable you to get those interviews. And again, friendly reminder, please share your questions about job applications in the chat in the meantime. All right, so I do want to start off, I just have a couple of slides to share again, only not trying to share everything I know, but just setting some context for our conversation. And I do want to talk about the process of applying online. And the reason I want to talk about applying online is because realistically, that's where most people start their job search. Most people, when they start looking for a new job, they get their resume ready, and then they go onto their favorite job board. Job board is any online platform that is designed to connect job seekers with jobs. So it can be Indeed, it can be Google Jobs, it can be Monster, Dice, LinkedIn Jobs, can be niche job boards, such as, remote.io is a remote job board. So there is a lot of options there, Glassdoor. But most people go to those job boards and start searching for jobs there and applying. And I do want to kind of paint a picture of what that process looks like when people are applying online. And so when you go to a job board and you see a job there, first of all, that's a really important way for you to discover that opportunity. But I want you to keep a few things in mind, what happens when you apply to that job, because that is the black box that a lot of people struggle with, right? You find a job online, you apply for it, and then sometimes you don't hear back. Sometimes you don't even get a rejection in reply. And I just want to give some context as to why that happens. And one thing to keep in mind is when you're applying, or when you see rather a job posting on a job board, you actually don't know what is the status of that job. So I hear a lot of people being frustrated that, I found the job, it's a perfect fit, I applied, I never heard back. Well, one thing that I want you to keep in mind is that don't take that personally. That might have absolutely nothing to do with you or your qualifications for the job. Because when you see a job on a job board, it usually stays there from the moment the job is posted online to the moment the job is filled, right? And what it means, filled means that somebody is hired to start doing that job. Well, the process of hiring somebody is much more complex than that, right? People apply, then there are some screening stages, interviewing stages, et cetera, et cetera. It can be a really long process. And so when you see a job posted online, again, great signal that that job might be available, but there is also a good chance that it's actually, it's been out there for a while, even if it looks recent. For various reasons, it might have been out there for a while. The company might not longer source new candidates. They might not even look at the application that you submit. So that's just something to keep in mind. The other thing to think about is that when you look at that job description and you think it's a perfect fit, it might be the case, but it also might be the case that it's different from what you expect it to be. Because what happens is sometimes when people put together job descriptions, there are different challenges that they come across. Sometimes people don't, when I say people, right, the hiring teams, sometimes they might not exactly know what they're looking for. And so they might write down sort of this vast list of requirements, but they're only looking for a few things, right? They're just kind of trying to figure out what kind of person they're looking for. Sometimes they might, as they start interviewing people, they might change their opinion as to what are the most important qualifications. Honestly, sometimes people just don't have an opportunity to put a lot of effort into writing job descriptions. So they might take a previously existing job description, make minor tweaks. Bottom line, a job that looks perfect from that job description might be perfect, but keep in mind, it actually might look different. And we will actually talk about all of the different ways you can address that in a minute, but I just want to set those expectations. And one more thing I want you to keep in mind with job boards is when a job is posted online, it is available to the whole wide world, right? If a job is on Indeed, everybody can see this job. And what that means is that job is generating a lot of applications. It is not uncommon for jobs that are posted online to have, tens, hundreds, and literally sometimes thousands of applications. Because again, everybody's looking at those jobs, and the online application process makes it so easy to submit your resume. So while you think, and maybe you're confident you're a perfect candidate for this job, well, it might be really difficult for the recruiter or the person reviewing the application to notice your resume in that pile, just because there is such a huge volume of applications there. And so I wanted to share this. These are the things to think about when you're applying on job boards online. And so I want you to just keep that in mind, because again, job boards and applying through job boards is a really important part of the job search process. It's where a lot of people start their job search, but there is also a lot of challenges, if you will, that come along with that. And next, I'm going to talk about what are the ways to address those challenges, because I know that that's something you want to know. All right, go to my next slide. Okay, and there are two, at a very high level, there are two ways to address that challenge that I'm going to talk about. And again, this is not designed to share everything I know. Please ask follow-up questions. These are just things to think about. And in no particular order, there are two things to think about. And one is improving your application, right? Let's assume the job exists. Let's assume the job is there. Let's assume that you're a good fit for the job. You always want to make sure that your application actually stands out from the crowd. Again, we already talked about the past, that there is so much competition. It's important to stand out. So it's important that you have, a resume that follows all of the best practices of resume writing, that meets the expectation of recruiters. They can find the information they're looking for on your resume, but also that your job is that your resume is actually tailored to the job you're applying for, because you want it to be, essentially when you submit an application, you want it to be very, very obvious to a recruiter within literally 5 seconds that you are a perfect fit for that role. You don't want them to need to kind of read between the lines of your resume. And the best way to do that is to tailor your resume to the job you're applying for. You might also want to submit a cover letter. So that's one thing to think about, is improving your applications. The other thing to think about is networking. And I cannot overemphasize the importance of networking in the job search process. And there is several reasons for that. I'm going to connect them to the challenges of the job boards that I had talked about a minute ago. So we've talked about the challenge, right, of the job board is you don't know if the job is actually available. You don't know if what are the actual requirements and what are the needs. And it's hard to stand out among those hundreds of applicants. So networking, and when I say networking, I mean talking to people within that company, is something that can address all of those challenges. Imagine if instead of submitting an application online, or in addition to submitting an application online, imagine you can talk to somebody who works in the group you want to be a part of, right? So who works maybe in a similar role, or maybe adjacent to that role. That person, would know exactly, likely to know exactly what positions are available, right? Whether they're, or they can find out whether the role that is posted online, they're still considering new candidates and it makes sense for you to apply. They might also know if there are jobs that are coming up but haven't yet been posted online. They will be able to tell you exactly what it's like to work in that role, and that what qualifications are necessary. That will enable you to tailor your application materials. And then finally, if you have good rapport with that person and they can refer you to the job, that is an amazing way to stand out, because when we're talking, those hundreds of applicants to the same role, many companies, probably most companies, will consider people who are referred by people within the company before they consider anyone else. So if you can if you can find a connection within the company, introduce yourself, get a referral, then your resume is going to be at the top of that pile, and you at least can make sure that somebody reviews your resume and really considers you for a role before moving on to the next application. So that's the context that I wanted to share. I'm going to move on to the questions really quickly, but before I do that, I did want to mention some of the resources that we have in the Coursera Career Center. The Coursera Career Center is located in the Coursera community. So let me, I'm not going to click on this, but if you go to www.coursera.community, you will reach Coursera's community platform. And at the very top, there's a little navigation that one of the options there is the Career Center. And in the Career Center, there is a public area where we have recordings of webinars, such as this one. We've done a lot. We also have job search guides, which we've written, which essentially go through the details of the job search process. Everything I've shared at a very high level right now in those guides is described in detail. So you can, if you need help on, identifying what's the right career for you, writing your resume, getting interviews, all of that is available through the Career Center. And then finally, there is also a section where you can ask questions to our community. And when you go there, please feel free to ask questions there if you don't get all of your questions answered today. Also, please consider looking at the questions that have been asked under Job Search Q&A and answering and providing your feedback to your fellow Coursera learners. So without further ado, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and I am going to jump straight into questions that we have coming in. In the meantime, please put your questions in chat. Great. Okay, so looks like we have a question from Shelby that reads, "Hi Vera, I see that a lot of modern resume styles that have the option to include a headshot. Is this a best practice now? Are there any concerns about bias?" That is absolutely a fantastic question. And I should caveat that everything I'm going to say today is going to be focused on the best practices in North America, United States primarily. A lot of this translates internationally. However, do keep in mind that some of the practices vary from country to country, and please make sure that you also check that against advice in your country and best practice in your country if you're not located in the United States. So as far as resume in North America go, yes, there is a lot of formatting options out there these days. I strongly recommend to not be overly concerned with the formatting and the visuals on your resume. There are two things that are most important about your resume. One, what's important is that the layout of your resume and that it's easy to read. What I mean by easy to read is somebody can glance at your resume, a recruiter specifically can glance in your resume and within 5 seconds, literally within 5 seconds, find all of the information that they really want to know about you. That means your sections need to be clearly labeled. That means your sections need to be clearly separated. That means that you should have, short, clear text. That's what really matters. Another thing that's really important is what's the content of your resume, of course, and what you've done. Now, when it comes to, again, there's a lot of different formats these days. There's headshots, there's columns, there's a lot of icons, listing different skills, etc. I encourage you to stay away from those for a simple reason that, believe it or not, when you apply online, well, that part you're going to believe, when you apply online, your resume usually goes into what's called an applicant tracking system. An applicant tracking system is any software that is designed to store your resume that is searchable. And applicant tracking systems, there are some modern ones, there are some older ones out there, and they don't always read formatting well. So what's important, so if you have fancy formatting, if you have visual elements, sometimes applicant tracking systems might lose that and lose the information located in those elements with it. So for example, if you have a box with your contact information, believe it or not, it might disappear. Not always, but in an older system, it might disappear. So I just encourage you to stay away with that. And I know the question was specifically about headshots. Generally, yes, it's a kind of a new trend that to include your headshot. I completely agree on the comment that it might create an opportunity to introduce unconscious or conscious bias. So that's just poor practice from employers and from job applicants. Also, it is not a commonly accepted practice to include headshots in the United States. So what that means is that employers don't expect to see your photograph. And there's really no reason to include that other than trying to make your resume more flashy, which, as I just said, is not necessarily a good strategy. Simple text is most of the time works best for resumes. All right, next question. Max asked a question about how to overcome challenges when you're applying to jobs when you're new to a country or a region. Well, I don't know all of the specifics of different markets. I'd love to share some general advice on this. So I think a good way to approach that question is going to be to think about sort of what do you do when you don't quite understand how the job search process works. And the best answer to that is really figuring out how the job search process works. It is, Max, there is a lot of information published out there. Again, if you go to the www.coursera.community, under the Career Center, you'll find job search guides that will provide you with information. There's tons of information available out there. But just in general, I'm a big fan of learning from people. So I would suggest set yourself a goal to talk to 3 different recruiters and ask them how the process works. I guarantee you, if you talk to 3, maybe 5 recruiters and really just interview them and ask them questions about how the job search process works. What do they look for? What are the big no-nos? What are things that help you stand out in the process? You will be an expert and you will be ahead of vast majority of job seekers who've spent their entire career in the United States. Now, when it comes to, so for that, I encourage you to set up some, go to LinkedIn, find some recruiters there, find recruiters who seem friendly, reach out to them, ask them if you can schedule 15 minutes and ask them a question about how that process works. Now, when it comes to translating your experience from another country, that's a different matter. So for example, if you're coming from a different country and you were a program manager there, and you're coming to the United States and you want to be a program manager in the United States, it's really important for you to understand the role of a program manager in the United States. So your first step is, again, research. And I'm going to suggest that, again, do the same exercise. Go if you have local communities you're plugged into, professional communities, or just LinkedIn, start looking for program managers. And reaching out to them for what's called informational interviews. Drop a note, again, have conversations with 3-5 program manager with a simple goal of really understanding what might be different about program management in the United States. That will enable you to really position yourself for success. That way you can describe your experience from abroad in a way that is relevant here. And as I said, position yourself for success. Another thing to think about is that, again, it is going to be a little bit more difficult for you to stand out among candidates who have local experience. So networking is going to be a huge part of the process for you. In addition to applying online, make sure to talk to people, find opportunities, and get referrals. Thank you for asking that question. Great. Next question. We have a question. A viewer asked, what should I do if I don't get the job? Do you have any advice on next steps or staying motivated? So I'm assuming what this question is referring to is what happens when you apply for a job and maybe you get an interview, but then you don't get a job. And I'm going to pause for a second there because I think it's a situation that we have all been in, and we've all heard the advice that, don't take it personally, shake it off and move on, etc. Uh, but it's much easier to give that advice than to actually apply that advice to yourself. I think realistically, I sometimes tell people, most of us, we're not actors, right? We don't expect to go to auditions day in and day out and be rejected over and over and over again. Even actors struggle with that. But as job seekers, I mean, we don't want to be looking for jobs. We want to be doing a job. We want to be excited. And it's very stressful to be interviewed and not get the job. It's even stressful if you didn't really want the job to begin with. So I have a couple of recommendations for that. One is give yourself a little bit of time. Expect that is going to affect you. Expect that it's going to upset you. Expect that it's going to shake your confidence a little bit. So just give yourself space to feel that. Second, find ways to feel good about yourself and feel good about yourself as a professional, right? If you didn't get a job and your confidence is shaken a little bit around if you're a good professional or not. Again, interviews is not a reflection of that in any shape or form, but you might feel like you're not such a great professional for some time. So find a way to feel great about yourself as a professional. Go do a project, a passion project that makes you feel good. Go talk to people you've worked with in the past or friends and ask them what's great about you. Go back and reread your performance reviews from the past. Just find a way to connect with what makes you happy about your career and what you're so proud of. And then the third thing that I'm going to recommend is find a way, find a support structure of some sort. For example, there is, there are great online communities. There is, in the San Francisco Bay Area where I live, for example, there is a Facebook group called Albert's List, which is a job network, job referral network. There's, I think, 30 or 40,000 people there. And there are people who come in there and they just share sort of the things, their good updates and their bad updates, and they get support from that community. And I do find it's very useful because it can feel, when you don't get the job, it can feel like you're the only one who is failing at this. Well, one, you're not failing. Two, more than one person was interviewed for the job, probably more than two people. So even for that job, there were multiple people who had the same experience as you. There were people who didn't get interviews to begin with. There were people who sort of dropped off in the earlier interview stages and didn't get to the next stages. So it's a very normal experience. And I find that finding people who you can share that experience with and discuss with is just helpful. But most importantly, it's not you. It's normal that you feel that way, and you're going to do great. Okay, let's move on. We've also got a question from JD. What tips do you have for applying to jobs when I have a 2-year job gap? Oh my goodness, I love that question. Thank you for asking that. I love all of these questions, but this is a great one as well. Gaps are challenging. One thing to keep in mind is that gaps these days are much more acceptable than they used to be back in the day. People take time off for families. People take time off for to travel. People take time off to explore personal opportunities. There's a lot of reasons, and we're in the 21st century. The work and life is much more integrated. than it used to be in the past. And so it's acceptable. Generally, nobody is going to mind that you took 2 years off in your career if they talk to you. The challenge is you need to explain what happened in that time on your resume. So there's a couple of ways to think about it. One is think about how you can communicate your professional growth and professional relevance in that time period. So if you took time off, maybe you had a child, for example, and you took 2 years off to sort of focus on your family, it is important that you show how you've stayed relevant for the workforce. So think about any personal projects that you did, any professional projects that you did, any learning that you did, and just think about how you can close that gap on your resume. Another thing to think about is if you did take time specifically to take care of someone, might be a child, it might be an elderly parent. If you were out of the workforce for a couple of years to take care of someone else, there is actually might be a number of opportunities for you out there. Look up the term returnship. And returnships are generally, they're like internships, but for people coming back into the workforce. And what's great about returnships, some companies have those returnship programs, is they're designed for people who've been out of the workforce, and therefore they're the path for you, designed specifically for people like that to get back. And then finally, another thing to keep in mind is, again, that gap. Whoever you're going to interview with, they're probably not even going to have any concern about that gap. The challenge that you're going to have is getting in front of someone and explaining that gap to them. So even if you find, as I said, like ways to include like learning, projects, consulting, whatever it is you've been doing on your resume, still might be difficult for you to compete against somebody who's coming right out of their previous job. And again, this is something where networking becomes a really important part of the process. These days, more and more companies are actively looking for people who have perspectives that are different from sort of people just going from one job to the next or staying in the same job. So there might be value. There are companies that actively value the fact that you took time off and did something else. But again, the online application process is not necessarily going to support you best in this. And so I do suggest kind of identify the companies you're interested in, identify the roles you're interested in, go and start talking to people who are working in those roles. Look for people, if you can find on LinkedIn, go and search, see if you can find people who've taken time off, talk to them and get their advice. But it's all about really just communicating what you did and how you grew over that time. All right, next question. Shelby asked, what are cover letter best practices? Do they matter? Are they needed? How do you make them stand out? How do you sound like you're not bragging? And I love the question about cover letters, because I think cover letters is a little bit of a confusing topic these days, because you get conflicting advice on that. And the advice on that, cover letters, really important. You always have to write a custom cover letter, which takes a lot of time. And at the same time, you hear that like cover letters don't, they don't matter anymore. It's kind of hard to navigate. And the reality is a lot of that advice is accurate. Unfortunately, there isn't a single answer. I've talked to recruiters who are extremely passionate about cover letters and are read cover letters that come in. And I've talked to recruiters that they don't have the time to read cover letters, so they're not even going to look at them. So the way I think about cover letters in general is there's two reasons to include a cover letter. Let's start with including a cover letter. One, include a cover letter if you include a cover letter if you have something important to communicate that you cannot explain in your resume. Cover letter that just duplicates your resume doesn't do anything for you. What do I mean by that? So for example, if you're changing a career, right? If you used to be a marketing manager and you decided to shift into iOS development, explain that. Cover letter is a great way to explain that transition. If you have a gap on your resume, cover letter is a great way to explain that gap. If you have some sort of unique set of skills that makes you like perfectly qualified, uniquely qualified for this job, sort of in an incredible way. So it brings together your personal passion for welding and your professional experience in instructional design. And I don't know, it is aligned with your goals to be a public speaker. That is something that you can communicate in a cover letter as well. So so my recommendation is write a cover letter when you really have something to say that that complements what you have on your resume and is beyond what you're communicating on your resume. That is a story that's going to stand out. Make sure your cover letters, just like your resumes, are specific and use facts, right? Like, don't using general terms like, you're a team player and enthusiastic and committed and a hard worker. That doesn't really mean anything. Use cover letter to tell stories that are going to be relevant to the employer. Give examples for why you are the best person for the job, why you're so passionate about this work. Also, but again, put effort, but know that your cover letter might not be read. So you still need to go down the networking path. And then finally, make your cover letters, just like everything else, to the point and as brief as possible. I'm going to say, 3-4 short paragraphs is as far as it can go. It shouldn't be a full page of text, a total of maybe like half a page of text. Organize the information well. Make sure that the person who's going to read your cover letter, if they read your cover letter, they're actually, they feel like they've used their time well and learned something that was relevant to them. Great. Next question. What are some best practices for explaining a career change? Let me take a sip of my tea. A career change, I don't think there is a best practice for explaining a career change because every career change is different. Fundamentally, again, we live in a world where career changes are much more accepted than they used to be. So fundamentally, what's most important is that you can tell a story that makes sense. The biggest concerns that employers have about career changers is that you're doing it on a whim. You're not committed to it. You might not stick to it. Of course, you're not bringing the experience if it's not a junior role where no experience is required. So you need to tell a story that is convincing to an employer that you're committed to this new career, that you're applying for this job, not because you're desperate and you can't find a job in your old field, that you're applying to this job because this is the job that you want, that this is the next logical step in your career. What does that mean? That story can be a little bit hard to tell. But so I encourage you to sit down and think about the big picture of your career. The way I think about it, right? Like you're trying to tell a story to the employer, whether you're changing careers or not. You're trying to tell a story that essentially you're trying to tell a story about your entire career that lands you in the job they're hiring for. So, for example, if you're changing careers and you come from, you had a career in marketing analytics, and for whatever reason, you decided to move and you're looking to shift into product management now. And you're now, right, like you're looking for your first product management role. And I'm making a picture of this imaginary timeline. So what you want, and you're applying for your first and probably fairly junior product manager role. So what you want to do is you want to talk about the transferable skills. What are the things that you did in your marketing career? You know, the communication, the cross-functional collaboration, analytical skills that you're bringing with you. And then you want to explain why from there you're moving into product management, right? And you need to kind of paint a picture where you see yourself going. And maybe fundamentally, the shift that happened in you is you realize that you're passionate about the products that people use, right? In your marketing analytics, looking at all of the data of how people interact with products, you realize how important the product actually is and how passionate you are. You can talk about the ways that you've engaged with product teams in the past if you have. But again, sort of like paint that as not a career change, if you will, but career shift as much as possible. You're still the same person, but you got some training, you've developed additional skills, and it makes perfect sense, right? It's not on a whim. It's not just because you saw a product management job with that. Oh, that's cool. But it's something that you learn about yourself and about the world that told you that yes, your next opportunity is coming in a slightly different direction. And again, also feel free to ask follow-up questions if you have any. But in the meantime, I'm going to move on to the next question. Mr. Paki is asking, do employers look at certificates from Coursera? What is the benefit of a Coursera certificate during the application process? That is a fantastic question, and that applies to a lot of learnings. Doesn't have to be Coursera. Of course, Coursera has a special place in my heart, and I believe in the value of these certificates. One thing to keep in mind is employers might or might not know, be familiar with your Coursera certificate specifically. So one thing that I encourage you to think about is don't just think about the certificate you got. Think about why that certificate should be significant to the employer. Think about the skills that you learned in this certificate. Think about the experiences you gained. For example, were there any hands-on projects that you can include on your resume that can show what you can do with the skills that you learn? And also think about if it's a certificate, whether it's a course or specialization, professional certificate, master track, whatever it is, the certificate that you have. Again, my recommendation is don't assume the employer is familiar with it. You got to explain what that certificate is. So for example, if it's a professional certificate, say you completed Google IT support certificate from Coursera, when you're putting on your resume, if you're a career changer, you don't have any IT experience, it's going to be very significant, right? It's that certificate that is going to indicate to the employer that you actually are serious about your new career in IT support and that you have the skills. But when you include that certificate under your education, include information, short, brief paragraph describing what that certificate is, right? Maybe say, it's a 5-course professional certificate covering foundations of IT support, networking, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Then make sure you also, in your skills sections on your resume, you list out the skills that you gained through that certificate. And then finally, as I said, if there are any projects, share that. Bottom line, think about from the employer point of view. Think about what's important for the employer. Why do you think that employer should care that you have this certificate? And then make sure to build that information into your resume. Anupam is asking, I have the skills needed to do the job, but I do not know how to write a resume that reflects those skills and projects. What are the best practices? It's a complex question because there is so many, there is so much to write in a resume. Just to setting the baseline for this, again, if you go to the Coursera Career Center, you can find a job search guide on how to write your resume. It is going to go over all of the best practices of resume writing. Resume writing is an art and a science. It's a science because there are certain things you need to know about about writing resumes, right? Like there are certain things the recruiters expect to see. Your resume, if you're a new career, it should be one page. It should have education and professional experience sections, et cetera, et cetera. So there are definitely rules you don't want to break around that. It's also a little bit of an art because you need to communicate who you are as a part of that process. So again, my recommendation is go kind of review the best practices, put together your resume, and get feedback on your resume. Also, get two types of feedback. One is you can compare your resume to job descriptions. Make sure that what you want to do is, again, you want somebody who has a job description in front of them to look at your resume and to be very clear that, yes, you're a great fit for this role. You can do it yourself, right? You can literally go through a job description and a resume and highlight that. There are also tools out there that allow you to do that. For example, one of the tools is called jobscan.co. Coursera is not affiliated with JobScan, but it's an example of a tool where you can post your resume and post a job description, and it'll tell you where the match is. So that's one type of feedback that you want. The other type of feedback you want is just on your resume, and a lot of people can provide you feedback on that. Anybody who's ever been in a position where they hired people can look at your resume and give you feedback. So my recommendation is find people that you know, or if you don't know anyone, I'm pretty sure you'll know somebody who have hired people in the past. But if you don't know them, find some friendly people on LinkedIn, maybe recruiters even, and ask them for their feedback. Keep in mind that you should ask multiple people for feedback. People have different preferences around resume writing. You don't have to take all of the feedback every person gives you. My recommendation, get feedback from 5 people, kind of see what the patterns are, what are the things that everybody's saying, make those adjustments, and from there sort of create a resume that works for you. And then finally, the best signal of how successful your resume is the response rate you get. So if you have a resume, apply to a lot of jobs, apply to 50 jobs. If you apply to 50 jobs and you have 10 interviews coming out of that, chances are your resume is in a pretty good shape. If you're applied for your resume for 50 jobs and you have no interviews, probably there are some things that you need to change. So fundamentally, a resume is just a tool to get you interviews. So if it's doing the job, it's in good shape. All right, another question. Is there a good process for reaching out to people at a company you're interested in working at? How do you find the right people to reach out to? Is it a recruiter, HR, or someone with a similar title? Great question. Because we only have about 10 minutes left, I'm going to also refer you to a resource. Again, if you go to www.coursera.community, go under Career Center Job Search Resources. There are job search guides there, and there is a guide on getting interviews that walks you through the networking process. So please take a look at that guide. It actually has some sample text you can use for reaching out to people, etc. But in general, you're absolutely right. If there is a job at a company you're interested in, you do want to reach out to people. And there are two ways, right? There are HR people, and then people who are in similar roles. Generally, recruiters can be a good starting point, because recruiters are really interested in getting the right talent. So my recommendation is look up recruiters on LinkedIn, drop them a note, say, hey, I'm interested in this role. I'm a really good fit because of XYZ. I'm curious, are you the right recruiter, or is there another recruiter I should reach out to? The recruiters are very engaged on LinkedIn. So if they think that you might be a fit, it's a really good way to stand out to them. If they respond, just ask them to send them your resume directly, and ask them if you can have a conversation with them about that job. Might work, might not work. The great thing is if you can get a conversation with a recruiter, that is literally a lot of the time going to be your first interview. So you're kind of bypassing the entire online application process, and you're going straight to the person who is in a position to move you forward in the process. As an alternative, you can also, as we talked, you can go to people who work within that group. Now, the great thing about people who work within that group is they have a lot of information about the job, and maybe not just this job, but upcoming jobs as well. And so I recommend if your interest is not only in this immediate role, but in just working for this company, it's a great idea to build those strong relationships with people who work in the group. So find somebody who's in a similar role, reach out to them. And maybe with those folks, sometimes it's better not to talk about necessarily about a specific role that's currently posted, but rather reach out to them and do a more proper, what's called informational interview with them, where you better understand their role, you ask them questions about their job in general, and that way you build a relationship. And if you have good rapport with them, then you can ask them if they're open to referring you to this job. Right. Next question. Should I be really well qualified for an internship in order to apply? How can you overcome the feeling of inadequacy? I know I can learn the necessary subject during the course of work. Should I include college classes on my resume? And I smiled while reading that, because it's just such a common challenge, right? Feeling that, well, am I really good enough for this job? The real way of overcoming it is just realizing that it's often normal to feel this way. And the fact that you feel inadequate doesn't mean that you are. You're probably well qualified. Here's something that I encourage you to think about, especially for internships and entry-level roles, but also for more advanced roles. Often your ability to learn and your passion and your desire to grow in this role can be as, and sometimes even more important than the hard skills, the technical skills that you bring to the table. Also keep in mind what I said earlier is that internships or job descriptions can be a laundry list of requirements. So it's not that anybody expects the person they hire to have all of those skills. They're just listing them just in case. Bottom line, don't let the fact that you don't have all of the skills stop you from applying. But something to think about is what you mentioned about being able to learn. It's really important to be able to articulate your ability to learn. So you're looking at a job description and you're thinking, well, I don't have all of the skills listed here, but I'm absolutely confident that I can be successful in this job. And what I want you to think about is, what do you know about yourself that gives you that confidence? Where does that come from? Is that from the classes that you've taken? Is that from projects you've done in your classes? Is that maybe from how you've handled things in your personal life? Maybe you've done something outside of school. Maybe you have work, but there is something that you know about you. There is proof from the past that makes you believe that you will be successful. And that proof is really important. You need to find a way to bring that proof into your resume to demonstrate it to the hiring team. So again, if it's from classes, make sure to include the information. If it's from extracurricular activity, include that information. If it's maybe from personal life, this could be something that is worth a cover letter, right? Something, a story from personal life, overcoming personal challenges that you can include. But again, go back to understanding why you're so confident you can do the job, and then make sure that you're communicating those points in your resume. Great. And thank you so much, everyone, for your questions. I'm going to take one more question because we're close to the top of the hour. But then please keep in mind that in 2 weeks, we're going to have another session like this to talk about the interviewing process. And also keep in mind the Career Center. Please feel free to hop onto the Career Center under Job Search Q&A and post your questions there. I would love to see discussions there and chime in. Okay, our last question, Aya is asking, how can I position my weaknesses in a way that I won't negatively impact my interview or candidacy? I tend to be very honest about both my strengths and shortcomings. Okay, I think we might talk about this in 2 weeks as well. This is a great question, and I love this question. And one thing that I want you to first think about is, what does the word honest mean? Because a lot of people tend to be their own best critics, harshest critics. I know that's true about me. That might be the case with you as well. And so, is your critical voice for yourself, is that the absolute objective truth? Or are there people that love you and care about you and respect you who would argue with that? So it's not just about honesty, right? It's about communicating relevant information. Weaknesses in general, I tend to think about strengths and weaknesses as flip sides of each other. We're all good at some things and worse at others. So think about, what is your weakness? What is the upside of your weakness and how you can position it that way? Also think about weaknesses that are not going to be fundamental to the job you're interviewing for. I always give an example. If you are a big picture thinker and you're not great, you're not a great proofreader. Your attention to detail is less than perfect. Let's put it that way. When you talk about your weaknesses, it's important to realize that, if you're an accountant, the fact that you don't have great attention to details, that's really bad. As an accountant, you need to have great attention to detail. But if you are a coach, for example, yes, of course, attention to detail is always important. But as a coach, it's much more important that you're able to connect with people, that you're able to empathize with people, etc. So if your weakness is attention to detail, that is not as crucial. So again, think about weaknesses that are not going to prevent you from success in your job. Next, think about what the flip side of that and how you can introduce your weakness that way. So for example, again, if your weakness is attention to detail, you can preempt that with, I'm a big picture thinker. It's really important for me to understand the strategy and make sure the strategy is coherent. As a result of that, sometimes I don't pay as much attention to the details. And then the last piece is make sure that you communicate how you account for your weaknesses, or how do you make sure that you do well, even though you have these weaknesses. So for example, as a result, I sometimes don't pay less attention. Some details might slip my attention. So for example, when it comes to writing emails, I've learned to always, to install an app that is going to do all of the grammar checking for me so there is no typos in those emails, for example, right? Or you've built mechanism, or I have somebody always check whatever the numbers or proofread my presentations, those kinds of things. So you just want to communicate that your weaknesses is really a flip side of your strength, that that those weaknesses are not going to prevent you of being amazing at your job, and that you've learned to really manage your weaknesses. And that is all I'm going to share today. Thank you, everyone, for your amazing questions. As I mentioned, we're going to do another one of these in 2 weeks, and we're going to talk about interviewing. Lots of relevant questions there. Please feel free to join. In the meantime, as I said, www.coursera.community. There is a tab for Career Center. There are resources. A lot of information I shared with you is described in more detail in those resources. There's also space for Q&A, so please ask your questions, answer your peers' questions, because we're really growing, want to tap into the wealth of knowledge and support that we can provide to each other as a Coursera learner community. Thank you, everyone.